The golden rays of dawn barely pierced through the ornate latticed windows of the forbidden palace as Mei Lin pressed her trembling hands against her hollow stomach. 3 days had passed since her last proper meal, and the gnawing hunger had become her constant companion. As one of the lowest-ranking servants in the imperial household, she received only scraps when there were any to spare. The palace, with all its magnificent halls adorned with silk tapestries and precious jade, had become her prison. While courtiers feasted on delicacies served on golden plates, she survived on rice water and wilted vegetables. Her once bright eyes had dulled, and her silk servant's robes, though modest, now hung loosely on her diminishing frame. That morning, desperation drove her to venture into the forbidden imperial gardens, where koi fish swam lazily in ornamental ponds. The penalty for a servant caught stealing from the emperor's prized collection would be severe, possibly death. But starvation had pushed her beyond caring about consequences. She knelt beside the largest pond, her reflection wavering in the clear water alongside the golden fish that represented prosperity and abundance she would never know. With shaking hands, she reached into the cool water, trying to catch one of the slower fish. The irony wasn't lost on her, surrounded by symbols of wealth and plenty, yet dying of hunger. Her fingers barely grazed a fish's scales when footsteps echoed across the stone pathway, causing her heart to leap into her throat. General Wei Zhang had risen before dawn, as was his custom, to walk the palace grounds and clear his mind before the day's military councils. At 35, he was the youngest general in the Han Army's history, having earned his position through valor in battle and unwavering loyalty to the emperor. His morning walks through the gardens provided the only peaceful moments in his demanding life. The sight that greeted him by the lotus pond was unexpected. A young woman in servant's attire, her hands submerged in the sacred koi pond, her face etched with desperate hunger. Most officials would have immediately called for guards to arrest the thieving servant, but something in her posture spoke to Wei Zhang's compassionate nature. He had seen that same desperation in the eyes of starving villagers during the recent border conflicts, and it stirred something deep within his warrior's heart. Instead of summoning punishment, he approached quietly, his military boots making soft sounds on the marble pathway. "The fish are faster in the morning cold," he said gently, causing the young woman to freeze. She turned toward him slowly, expecting to face her executioner, but found instead a man whose eyes held understanding rather than judgment. Mei Lin's first instinct was to kowtow deeply, pressing her forehead to the cold stone in the traditional gesture of absolute submission. She had never seen this particular official before, but his rich robes and confident bearing marked him as someone of considerable importance, someone whose displeasure could mean her death. "This humble servant begs forgiveness," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of water against the pond's edge. Wei Zhang studied the trembling figure before him, noting the pronounced angles of her shoulder blades, visible through the thin fabric of her worn robes. Her hair, though carefully pinned in the style required of palace servants, showed signs of neglect, not from vanity, but from the weakness that comes with prolonged hunger. "Rise," he commanded softly, and when she slowly lifted her head, he saw a face that would have been beautiful if not marked by the gaunt shadows of starvation. Her eyes, though filled with fear, held an intelligence that intrigued him. "What is your name, and how long has it been since you've eaten properly?" His question, asked with genuine concern rather than interrogation, surprised them both. "This unworthy one is called Mei Lin, honored sir. I have eaten," she lied, unwilling to admit her desperate circumstances to this powerful stranger. Wei Zhang's military training had taught him to read people quickly and accurately. The slight tremor in her voice, the way she unconsciously placed a hand over her stomach, the careful way she moved to conserve energy, all signs he recognized from soldiers who had been too long without adequate provisions. "The kitchen servants have prepared more food than I can consume for my morning meal," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives. It would be wasteful to let it spoil. "Perhaps you could assist me by ensuring it doesn't go to waste?" Mei Lin looked up sharply, searching his face for signs of mockery or trap. Finding neither, she felt tears threaten to spill from her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of unexpected kindness. Wei Zhang's private quarters were more modest than Mei Lin had expected from such a high-ranking official. While still elegant, with carved wooden furniture and silk wall hangings, the space felt lived in rather than merely ornamental. Scrolls of military strategy were spread across a low table, and weapons hung neatly on the walls, tools of his trade rather than mere decoration. The breakfast laid out before them was simple by palace standards, but appeared magnificent to Mei Lin's starving eyes. Steamed rice in a jade bowl, delicate fish prepared with ginger and scallions, pickled vegetables in small ceramic dishes, and tea that smelled of jasmine and spring mornings. "Please sit," Wei Zhang gestured to the cushion across from his own, but Mei Lin remained standing, her training as a servant warring with his invitation. "Honored General, this lowly servant cannot—" "Today you are not my servant but my guest," he interrupted gently but firmly, "and guests in my home honor me by sharing my meal." With great hesitation, Mei Lin lowered herself to the cushion, her movements careful and uncertain. Wei Zhang began serving himself, then casually filled her bowl with rice and placed several pieces of fish upon it, pretending not to notice when her hands shook slightly as she lifted the chopsticks. The first bite was nearly overwhelming. The flavors, so long denied to her, seemed to awaken every sense. She forced herself to eat slowly, mindful of proper etiquette even in her desperation, but Wei Zhang pretended to read his scrolls while she ate, giving her the privacy to satisfy her hunger without the burden of being observed. As color slowly returned to her pale cheeks, he found himself wondering about her story. Over the following weeks, the morning meals became a quiet routine. Wei Zhang would find reasons to summon Mei Lin to his quarters, sometimes to organize his scrolls, other times to tend his small herb garden, always ensuring the tasks coincided with meal times. Through these shared moments, he learned her story. Mei Lin had been born to a scholar's family in a distant province, but when her father fell from favor after criticizing a corrupt local official, their property was seized and her family scattered. She had sold herself into palace service to avoid starvation, accepting the lowest position available to a woman of no connections or influence. "I was fortunate," she said one morning, carefully arranging his military maps. "Many women in my situation face far worse fates." Wei Zhang paused in his writing, struck by her resilience and lack of bitterness. Despite her circumstances, she spoke of literature and philosophy with the education her father had provided, and her insights often surprised him with their depth and clarity. "You mentioned your father was a scholar. What did he teach you?" Mei Lin's eyes brightened, the first time he had seen genuine joy in her expression. "He believed daughters should be as educated as sons. I learned the classics, poetry, mathematics, and even basic principles of governance. He said knowledge was the one possession that could never be stolen." Her father had been wrong about that last part, Wei Zhang reflected. Poverty and servitude had effectively stolen her ability to use her education, trapping her intelligence in circumstances that gave it no outlet. As he watched her delicate fingers carefully straightening his maps, an idea began to form in his mind, one that was both audacious and completely contrary to social conventions. The imperial court buzzed with rumors that General Wei Zhang was considering marriage. At 35, He was long past the age when most men of his station chose wives, and his single status had become a source of speculation among the palace matchmakers and ambitious families hoping to advance their daughters. Several high-ranking families had already approached him with proposals, offering daughters educated in music, poetry, and the arts of managing a household. These were appropriate matches for a man of his position, alliances that would strengthen political connections and produce sons to carry on his family name. But as Wei Zhang sat in his quarters each morning, sharing breakfast and conversation with Mei Lin, he found himself comparing these potential brides to the intelligent, resilient woman before him. While the daughters of nobility had been sheltered and pampered, Mei Lin had faced genuine hardship with dignity. Where others might offer conventional beauty, she possessed a quick wit and genuine wisdom earned through suffering. The idea that had been growing in his mind was scandalous by any measure. What if he didn't marry for political advantage? What if instead he chose to elevate someone who deserved elevation? "Mei Lin," he said one morning, setting down his teacup with unusual care. "If you could have any life you chose, what would it be?" She looked up from the scroll she was copying for him, her brush suspended in surprise. "Honored General, such questions are not for people like me to consider." "Humor me," he said gently. "If the gods granted you any wish, what would you ask for?" After a long pause, she whispered, "To be useful. To use the education my father gave me for something meaningful. To honor his memory by becoming someone he could be proud of." It was not the answer he had expected, but it confirmed everything he had come to believe about her character. The conversation that would change both their lives began on a spring morning when cherry blossoms drifted like snow across the palace gardens. Wei Zhang had requested that Mei Lin meet him in his private study, where he had spent sleepless hours preparing words for a proposition that defied every social convention of their time. "Mei Lin, what I'm about to suggest will sound impossible, perhaps even insulting," he began, his usual confidence replaced by uncharacteristic nervousness. "I ask only that you listen completely before you respond." She knelt properly before him, her training as a servant making her posture automatically deferential, but her eyes showed curiosity rather than fear. Over the weeks of their morning meals, she had grown comfortable in his presence, a remarkable transformation for someone whose life had been defined by careful subservience. "I have been approached by several families seeking to arrange marriages," Wei Zhang continued, pacing slowly before the window that looked out onto his small garden. "Each offers advantages, political alliances, dowries, connections that would benefit my career and family name." Mei Lin's heart sank, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Of course he would marry appropriately. Their morning conversations had been a pleasant interlude, but she had been foolish to imagine they meant anything more than the kindness of a compassionate master to a pitiful servant. "But I find myself uninterested in such arrangements," he continued, turning to face her directly. "I have discovered that I prefer the company of someone whose worth comes from character rather than birth, whose intelligence has been proven through adversity rather than displayed in drawing rooms." Understanding began to dawn in her eyes, bringing with it a mixture of hope and terror. "You cannot mean what I think you mean," Mei Lin whispered, her composure finally cracking. "The scandal alone would destroy your career. The Emperor would never approve such a match. I am nobody, less than nobody." Wei Zhang knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level in a gesture that reversed every protocol of their social positions. "You are far from nobody, Mei Lin. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Your birth circumstances do not define your worth any more than my military rank defines mine." "But the practical considerations," she began, her mind racing through the impossibilities. "Can be managed," he interrupted gently. I have given this considerable thought. There are precedents, though rare, of men elevating their chosen wives before marriage. With the proper documentation of your father's scholarly lineage and a formal adoption into a respectable family, my own cousin has agreed to sponsor this fiction. You could be transformed from servant to suitable bride. The audacity of the plan left her breathless. Why? She asked simply. Why risk everything for someone like me? Wei Zhang reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and gently took her hands in his. Because in all my battles, in all my victories and honors, I have never felt as content as I do during our morning conversations. Because your wisdom surpasses that of the Emperor's advisors, and your courage exceeds that of many soldiers I have known. Because when I imagine my future, you are the only person I see beside me. Mei Lin stared at their joined hands, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he offered. Freedom from servitude, elevation to nobility, marriage to a man she had come to deeply respect, and if she was honest with herself, love. What would you require of me? She asked quietly. The process of transforming a palace servant into a suitable bride for a general required careful orchestration and considerable resources. Wei Zhang's cousin, Lady Chen, arrived at the palace within days of their agreement, bringing with her a carefully constructed story and the legal documents necessary to make it reality. According to their fabricated history, Mei Lin was actually the daughter of a respected scholar from Lady Chen's home province, who had died in an epidemic. Lady Chen, moved by compassion for the orphaned girl, had taken her in as an adopted daughter, but had delayed announcing the adoption due to her own recent bereavement. The story was plausible enough to satisfy official requirements while explaining Mei Lin's current circumstances. The physical transformation was equally dramatic. Lady Chen, a woman of impeccable taste and substantial wealth, took personal charge of Mei Lin's wardrobe and education in the subtle arts expected of a general's wife. Silk robes replaced cotton servants' attire, elaborate hairstyles replaced simple braids, and jade ornaments marked her new status. But the most significant changes were less visible. Years of bowing her head and speaking only when spoken to had left their mark on Mei Lin's posture and manner. Lady Chen worked patiently to help her remember how to carry herself with the dignity her father had once taught her. You must unlearn servitude, Lady Chen explained during one of their daily lessons. Your husband-to-be has seen your true nature, but society will judge you based on your presentation. They must see a woman worthy of respect, not a former servant pretending at nobility. The lessons were challenging, requiring Mei Lin to suppress instincts developed through years of survival and replace them with the confidence appropriate to her new position. Some days, the transformation felt impossible. The gap between who she had been and who she needed to become seemed insurmountable. The announcement of General Wei Zhang's engagement to the previously unknown Lady Mei Lin created exactly the scandal they had anticipated. Palace corridors buzzed with whispered speculation about the mysterious bride whose family connections seemed conveniently vague and whose appearance at court coincided suspiciously with the general's sudden decision to marry. Several families whose marriage proposals had been rejected were particularly vocal in their disapproval, suggesting that the general had been deceived by an opportunistic woman of questionable background. The emperor himself summoned Wei Zhang for a private audience to discuss his choice of bride. This woman appears from nowhere, with connections that cannot be verified, and you wish to bind our most valuable military commander to her. Emperor Wu's voice carried the dangerous edge that preceded many executions. Wei Zhang had prepared for this confrontation, knowing his answer would determine not only his own fate, but Mei Lin's life as well. Your Imperial Majesty, Lady Mei Lin's father was scholar Liu Weiming, whose writings on governance principles were once praised by the court. His daughter has inherited his intelligence and wisdom, qualities I believe will serve our empire well. And if I discover you have been deceived, if this woman proves to be other than she claims, then I accept full responsibility for my poor judgment, Majesty. But I have observed her character closely and am confident in my assessment. The Emperor studied his general's face, reading the absolute conviction there. Wei Zhang had never shown poor judgment in military matters or personal conduct. After a long pause, the Emperor nodded slowly. Very well, but understand that any scandal reflecting poorly on this court will be met with severe consequences. As Wei Zhang left the imperial presence, he knew they had won the first battle, but the war for social acceptance would be far more challenging. The wedding of General Wei Zhang and Lady Mei Lin was necessarily a grand affair, befitting the groom's high status, while serving to legitimize the bride's questionable origins. Every detail was carefully orchestrated to project an image of propriety and celebration, despite the undercurrent of whispered gossip among the guests. Mei Lin wore robes of deepest red silk, embroidered with golden phoenixes and dragons in the traditional symbols of marital harmony. Her hair was arranged in the elaborate style of a noble bride, secured with jade pins that caught the light as she moved. To observers unfamiliar with her history, she appeared every inch the appropriate wife for a distinguished general. But beneath the magnificent exterior, Mei Lin struggled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. The girl who had knelt beside koi ponds, trying to catch fish with bare hands, now stood before hundreds of the empire's most powerful citizens, accepting their bows and congratulations. The transformation felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. Wei Zhang, resplendent in his military dress uniform with its golden embroidery and ceremonial sword, had never appeared more handsome or commanding. But it was the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the gentle pressure of his hand during the ceremony that gave her strength to continue the performance. The traditional tea ceremony, where the bride formally acknowledges her new family relationships, proved particularly challenging. Wei Zhang's parents, though supportive of their son's choice, struggled to hide their bewilderment at his selection of such an unconventional bride. His mother's smile was polite but reserved, her questions about Mei Lin's family background carefully neutral. As the ceremonies concluded and guests began the elaborate feast, Mei Lin realized that this was only the beginning of her new life's challenges. The first months of marriage tested both Wei Zhang and Mei Lin in ways neither had fully anticipated. While their morning conversations had revealed intellectual and emotional compatibility, the practical aspects of sharing a life proved more complex. Mei Lin's unfamiliarity with managing a household of servants created initial difficulties. Having been a servant herself, she instinctively treated the staff as equals, creating confusion about authority and protocol. Wei Zhang gently helped her understand that kindness and leadership were not mutually exclusive, and that the servants needed clear direction to function effectively. "You must remember that you are no longer one of them," he explained one evening after a particularly challenging day. "Your kindness honors you, but they need to respect your position to serve you properly." More challenging were the social expectations placed upon a general's wife. Mei Lin was expected to host gatherings for other military wives, participate in court functions, and maintain relationships that could benefit her husband's career. Each interaction required careful navigation of complex social hierarchies and unspoken rules she was still learning. But in private moments, their relationship deepened beyond what either had imagined possible. Wei Zhang discovered that having a wife who understood military strategy made him a better commander. Mei Lin's fresh perspective on tactical problems often revealed solutions he had overlooked. Her education in governance principles proved invaluable when he was asked to advise on civilian administration in conquered territories. For Mei Lin, marriage brought not just security and status, but the opportunity to use her intelligence in meaningful ways. She began writing policy recommendations that Wei Zhang presented to the emperor, her insights gaining recognition even though their true author remained hidden behind her husband's name. Their love, which had begun as mutual respect and kindness, grew into something profound and unshakable. 2 years into their marriage, a crisis arose that would test everything they had built together. A political rival of Wei Zhang's, jealous of the general's growing influence and seeking any weakness to exploit, launched a careful investigation into Lady Mei Lin's background. The evidence he uncovered was damning. Records showing a palace servant named Mei Lin, who had disappeared from the employment rolls at exactly the time the mysterious Lady Mei Lin had appeared at court. Witness testimony from former servants who recognized her despite her transformation. Documentation that proved Lady Chen's adoption story was a fabrication. The rival General Huang presented his findings to the emperor with great ceremony, demanding that Wei Zhang be stripped of rank for deceiving the court and that his fraudulent wife face the punishment reserved for those who falsely claim noble status. When Wei Zhang learned of the accusations, his first instinct was to protect Mei Lin by divorcing her immediately and claiming he had been deceived. But when he suggested this course of action, she refused. "I will not let you sacrifice your honor to save me," she said firmly. "If we fall together. But perhaps there is another way." Her plan was audacious. Rather than deny the charges, they would acknowledge them publicly while reframing the narrative. Instead of a story of deception and fraud, they would present it as a story of transformation and redemption. A powerful general who chose worth over birth, and a woman who proved that nobility comes from character rather than bloodline. "The emperor values results above all else," Mei Lin reasoned. "Show him what this fraudulent marriage has accomplished." Wei Zhang was skeptical, but he trusted his wife's wisdom. Together they prepared their defense, knowing that their lives hung in the balance. The imperial court had never witnessed a scene quite like the one that unfolded when General Wei Zhang and Lady Mei Lin appeared before the emperor to answer charges of fraud and deception. Rather than the expected denials and excuses, Wei Zhang began with a complete confession. "Your Imperial Majesty, the charges against us are true in their facts, but false in their implications," he declared, his voice carrying the same authority he used when addressing troops before battle. "I did indeed marry a woman who was born to humble circumstances and served in your palace, but I did not deceive you about her worth." He then presented a carefully prepared account of his military victories over the past 2 years, many of which had been achieved using strategies developed through discussions with his wife. He revealed the policy recommendations that had successfully improved civilian administration in conquered territories, recommendations written by Mei Lin but credited to him. This woman, whether born noble or common, has proven herself more valuable to our empire than any dozen high-born ladies. She has contributed to our military success, our administrative efficiency, and our territorial expansion. Her origins do not diminish these achievements. Mei Lin stepped forward, her bearing now showing none of the servility of her former life. "Your Imperial Majesty, I do not ask forgiveness for my birth, for that was not my choice. I ask only that you judge me by what I have accomplished and contributed to your realm." The emperor listened in silence as they presented evidence of their contributions to the empire. When they finished, the court waited breathlessly for his judgment. After a long pause, Emperor Wu spoke. "You have indeed deceived this court about your wife's origins, but you have not deceived us about her value. The empire benefits from wisdom wherever it is found, whether in palaces or servants' quarters." His final pronouncement surprised everyone. Rather than punishment, he elevated Mei Lin's status officially, granting her a noble title in recognition of her contributions to the empire. The scandal became a legend, the story of a general who saw worth where others saw only servitude, and a woman who proved that true nobility comes from within. Their marriage became a model of partnership and mutual respect, remembered long after both had passed as proof that love and wisdom can triumph over convention and prejudice.